What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name's Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about some Black Templars. Somehow, I made a bunch of videos over the last couple weeks about Tyranids. Obviously, we had Warzone Octarius come out, and I was super in on Tyranids. And somehow, on basically every Tyranid video I did, somebody asked me to go over the Black Templars Codex. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And in no small part, because the November giveaway for the channel is... Grab these guys out here. I got two Black Templars army sets. Here's one. Here's the other one. And we're giving these away this month. So if you check out the last channel update for November, oh no, go back in your box there, buddy. If you check out the last channel update for November, you can see how to win those. Also, exclamation point giveaway in the chat will also get you. This was not well thought out. We'll also get you instructions on how to enter to win those. You get some extra entries if you're a patron. All that stuff. It's all explained at the link, but that's pretty exciting. Can we cover the Octarius Tyranid stuff too? Yes, absolutely. We'll do that in the past, I guess. We did two videos over the last couple weeks on Octarius stuff, and so it's time to talk about a different faction, and one that I guess has a ton of people who are super excited about it. So, what we're going to be doing here is just going over the core mechanics of the faction. I'm going to give some thoughts on it. We'll do a little bit of a Q&A, some audience interaction. I did try to go through and build some lists with Black Templars. Interestingly, I mean, I guess not that interestingly, most of the lists I ended up building and ended up being kind of evolutions of other versions of a Space Marine list that was already existing. So I don't know if that's the most interesting thing to talk about, but I do think Black Templars do have some different uses for pretty common Space Marine units, which is pretty cool. They do combo differently with units, although they don't necessarily take, you know, much different units. They operate differently in a Black Templars army than they would in, say, any other army. And the reasons for those we'll talk about as we go over this codex. Now, I do have, it's up on Wahapedia, so we're going to be going over a Wahapedia right now. I do have a copy of the codex here with me, but which I used just to verify any information that I thought was interesting. But this is, rather than me like videotaping myself looking at a page, we have it all online. So I think that's going to be a little bit more easily legible. So that's what we're going to do as we talk about some of the core mechanics of this faction. Now, I've talked about it a little bit before in the past, but I think that Games Workshop previously has not done a very good job of differentiating the different Space Marine chapters. And that's kind of emblematic of that is like the difference between Blood Angels and White Scars currently. Is that there really isn't one. White Scars just do what Blood Angels do, but like significantly better in every way, and Blood Angels have kind of lost their faction identity. And in the past, I sort of rolled Black Templars into that. You know, they're the three big like melee Space Marine chapters. They just run up and punch people, and Black Templars always did things differently because they have, you know, they operate differently in the background, but they didn't really have their own faction identity. And I think what's interesting about this supplement is that they've really been given their own theme, and a lot of that is based around sort of primary objective control. So rather than necessarily being, you know, they've always been kind of a horde army where they take a lot of units, they take larger squads than other chapters, and then they have their own mechanics, you know, based on litanies and relics and things like that. But they also have a lot of effects that give them more control over scoring objectives in their command phase than other factions have. And so while they don't deal, you know, as much damage, they aren't quite as resilient as other chapters, you'll find that a lot of times they're really good at stealing victory points from you. And they're very tenacious, I guess, on the tabletop, which I think is really interesting. So they're a very tricksy faction. They're going to be a lot more finesse-oriented than other Space Marine chapters, but they also have some really powerful abilities, you know, overarching army buffs that they're going to be using. And I think also it's important to talk about their synergy with litanies. They have their own, I guess, lore of litanies, their own list of litanies that their chaplains can recite, with their own unique effects that are generally more powerful effects than the core group of litanies, but they also don't lose access to those original litanies. So, I think if there was an army to take 2 chaplains in, it would certainly be Black Templars, and I don't think you're legally allowed to run a Black Templars army without a chaplain. I think, the FBI knocks your door down. So yeah, let's start talking about it. We can talk about the army rules to start with. Now, one thing that's very interesting and I think is really important to note is that you cannot take a Black Templar successor chapter. Just straight up. I mean, you can, but all of their abilities shut off if you don't specifically have the Black Templars keyword. So if you look at other chapter supplements, like the Ultramarine supplement or the Salamander supplement, they all have a separate section in the supplement talking about what happens if you've taken a successor of that chapter. Black Templars don't have that, so they basically say, if you're an Ultramarine successor or a Salamander successor, this is how you operate using stratagems from that particular chapter. This is how your Warlord traits operate. Black Templars don't have any of that text, which means that unless you specifically have the Black Templars keyword, every ability in the supplement turns off. So you get no benefit from it whatsoever. So you essentially cannot take a successor chapter of a Black Templars army, which I guess is fine. I would sort of like to see that in the future. I think, especially for Space Marines, the custom chapter rules are a little they're very broad. you have a lot of control over your custom chapters, and it gives you a lot of optimization you can do. Whereas other factions just have to mostly stick with the pre-existing sub-factions, and I think I would like that to be the case for Space Marines too, but it is what it is. That is how Black Templars operate, though, so you basically take the Black Templars chapter tactic or you go home. That's it. Those are your 2 options. Now, if you do have that Black Templars chapter tactic, you obviously get the base chapter tactic, which is reroll charges and advanced rolls, and you get a 5+ damage ignore roll against mortal wounds. That is unchanged from the Space Marine Codex. But interestingly, you also get a Super Doctrine ability. So this is an ability that triggers if everything in your army, besides unaligned units in this case, or agents of the Imperium, has the Combat Doctrines ability. So if everything in your army is a Space Marine, you also unlock these Templar vows, which are sort of defining of the faction. Now, normally in other chapters, these are abilities that will trigger when you are in a particular doctrine. Whichever doctrine is favored by the chapter, you'll get an additional benefit for being in those. So, for example, Ultramarines they are counted as stationary when they're firing their weapons if they're in the tactical doctrine. The Templar vows replace the old Super Doctrine ability that Black Templars used to have. So previously they had a Gene Rot Might effect if they were in the Assault Doctrine, so all of their 6s to hit automatically wounded. They do not have that any longer. That's gone the way of the dodo, although it is rolled into one of these Templar vows. Instead, you get this overarching army-wide effect that is persistent across the whole game. It doesn't matter what doctrine you're in. So that's great. And you choose it at the end of the read mission briefing step. So after you look at your opponent's army and you know the mission setup, you choose which of these effects are going to be affecting your army. And some of the effects are very powerful. They do have that transhuman effect still in here in Suffer Not the Unclean to Live. The downside is that these all come with a drawback. So in this case, this is actually a pretty big downside, one that I think there's a lot of nuance that people haven't really considered. That you have to charge the nearest, when you are selected to charge, you must charge the nearest enemy unit that is not currently engaged by another Black Templars unit. So it does throw a wrench in the works and sort of significantly changes how you have to operate your charge phase, which is a little bit interesting. And I think the drawbacks are certainly going to sort of define how often these particular vows are taken. The other important one I think to talk about is Uphold the Honor of the Emperor, which gives you a stalwart effect. So if you can only be wounded on a 3+, more importantly, it gives your entire army a 5+ invulnerable save. However, you do not benefit from cover. There is an open question here whether or not that pertains to dense cover, because ignoring cover also ignores dense cover, but not receiving cover hasn't been ruled on whether or not you receive dense cover as a benefit, because dense cover affects the attacking model, not the defending model. Although previously they've ruled it that, you know, things on the defending model will still apply that, or effects on the defending model will still apply the penalty to the attack model. It's very confusing and it sucks. There may be a chance that you do not get dense cover with while this vow is active. If that's the case, I imagine that that's the intention, but obviously it could be ruled the other way. We don't know yet because this hasn't been FAQ'd yet. If you do get dense cover, this is straight up just the best vow, full stop, because dense cover, you know, doesn't tend to require you to be in any particular place, and also the light and heavy cover that you would lose from taking that vow doesn't affect vehicles, whereas that 5+ invulnerable save is going to be very good on vehicles. So it actually gives Black Templars, I think, access to a little bit more of kind of a vehicle focus list potentially, where they can give kind of a Psychic Fortress to anything in their army without having to actually cast a Psychic Fortress, which is great. So you can imagine things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts, or, you know, even Land Raiders with the 5+ invulnerable save are going to be doing a lot better. Those guys not benefiting from dense cover is a downside, but it's not the end of the world, especially since most of that stuff has access to Smokescreen anyway. So I think a lot of the time, depending on how you build your army, you might be taking Uphold the Honor of the Emperor. We also have Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch. This gives you +3 inches of movement on your first movement phase. This is worded very confusingly, and I actually, when this was originally spoiled, I talked about it a little bit differently, because it says it's once per battle in your first movement phase, you add 3 inches to your movement characteristic. I missed the word first, essentially, the first time I talked about this ability, because this once per battle clause is in there. So if you were... why... I don't know why that once per battle clause is in there. You only ever have one first movement phase. You can't have a first movement phase multiple times. So it only works the first turn. But that's important to keep in mind. I thought it was sort of a mini featable ability where you could determine when you would proc this +3 inches of movement. It's only the first battle round, and that makes it not very great, actually. It only triggers if there are Psyker units in your opponent's army, and you can't perform actions while within 18 inches of Psyker units, but you get reroll 1s to wound against them. Reroll 1s to wound, not the biggest effect. It's also only melee attacks, not all your attacks. If your opponent has a bunch of big Psykers that you think you're going to be charging, you know, maybe it's worth considering, but +3 inches of movement, basically on the turn during which it's the least impactful, is not super helpful. You know, also potentially if your opponent has an army-wide Psykers, so everything's a Psyker, like Grey Knights or Thousand Suns, getting full rerolls to wound, or reroll 1s to wound in the fight phase against their whole army is pretty reasonable, but also not being able to perform actions is a kind of a downside. Yeah, I don't think this vow is particularly good, especially since you can build your army around vows like Uphold the Honor of the Emperor. Lastly, accept any challenge no matter the odds. Always counts you as having charged for Sock Assault, so even if on multiple rounds of combat, you'll still be getting your +1 attack, and it always counts you in Assault Doctrine as long as you're engaged with an enemy unit. However, you can't fall back. This one's fine, and I think if you're in a situation where the defensive effect of Uphold the Honor of the Emperor is not useful, I think you're kind of automatically gonna audible into accept any challenge no matter the odds. Suffer Not the Unclean to Live is a very powerful ability. It does give you that Gene Rot Might ability. The downside is that I talked about the charge restriction is very restrictive, and that's because you have to, as one of the targets of your charge when you're selected to charge, choose the closest unit that isn't engaged by a Black Templars unit, which means that if you're in a situation, especially with characters or, you know, a multiple small unit army, which Space Marines often build, where, you know, you're bringing multiple units of 5 Vanguard Veterans or 5 Incursors or stuff like that, as soon as the first one makes contact with the nearest enemy unit, suddenly, if there are any other eligible targets of a charge, your subsequent units that are charging may not be able to target the original enemy with their charge. Certainly, this is probably fine if your opponent has a smaller army and you don't necessarily have multiple units in that charge. But for example, if you have, you have 2 Black Templars units, right? We'll put a little B on them. And then you have 2 enemy units. One of them is a screening unit right here. We'll call them an E for enemy. And then they have like a character over here. And your first Black Templars unit makes that charge. Your second Black Templars unit is required to also charge this character. And if that model is 11 inches away, you suddenly have to make an 11-inch charge in order for this charge to be successful, since you have to end in engagement range of all of your targets. And I think those situations are gonna come up, and they're absolutely gonna catch people who are playing this vow offline or off guard. So play Suffer Not the Unclean to Live very, very cautiously, because it is super tough. I think Accept Any Challenge and Uphold the Honor of the Emperor are kind of no-brainers if you're when you're selecting your vow, and I think those are the 2 most powerful, for sure. Now, as I said, these affect everything in your army. All of your Black Templars unit gain that ability, assuming that you fulfill their requirements. So you don't even have to do anything else. There's no doctrines involved. It doesn't matter what unit in the army it is. Boom. Everybody gets it. Full stop. It's pretty sweet. Now, we also have another special ability here called Relicbearers, which is kind of where the Black Templars army gets a lot of its flavor. This is unlocked if you have a chaplain. You can then spend points, so there's like a chapter command upgrade, to bestow these relics to individual models in your infantry or biker units, specifically not characters, which is good. So you can't stack them on top of other relics and warlord traits on characters. But it does give you the ability to modify things like unit champions and individual models inside units, which is very cool. It gives you kind of additional little special weapon guys, but that also interact in interesting ways with things like wound allocation and especially resurrecting models with an apothecary. So some of these we can skip over. Light of the Emperor's Grace gives you a leadership buff and messes with Psychers a little bit. That's mostly garbage. You can kind of ignore it. Sigismund's Seal is a little bit more interesting. It's basically a Seal of Oath, but it only works for your unit, and it only works in melee. So you pick something at the start of the game, and your unit gets rerolls against that enemy unit. Sure. The downside that it's only melee, and that means that your opponent has sort of the greatest opportunity to stop you from being able to trigger it. So it's much more situational than the other relics that you can take on this list, and in a lot of situations, you're going to get 0 use out of it. Your opponent's just going to get shot to death before it gets there. Your opponent's going to redeploy that unit away from you. Your opponent just has a bunch of 5-man intercessor squads, and you're like, great, I get to reroll against this 100-point idiot unit over here that I don't need. So I think there's a lot of fail cases for Sigismund's Seal. I don't love that one. The Holy Orb, on the other hand, I think is very good. It's a targeted fight last within 6 inches you use in your shooting phase, and it also deals D3 mortal wounds once per game. Love it. For just 15 points. I think that's pretty good. I talked about this a little bit in my preview video where we talked about the previews of all of these mechanics. And the most interesting thing about it, in my opinion, is that it doesn't require you to have shot with the unit that you're doing it. So you can use it to deal D3 mortal wounds sort of out of sequence with the unit that's carrying the orb, or you can advance and do it. So you can put it on something like a biker unit leader and just run him 20 inches up and then fight last on whatever you hit. Now, I think this is worded pretty cleverly as well, because these are 2 separate effects. On a 2+, the unit takes D3 mortal wounds, and also they're not eligible to fight. So it's not that on a 2+, they're not eligible to fight. Only the mortal wounds trigger on a 2+, which means the effect of the fight last, which is really what you're trying to get out of the Holy Orb, is automatic. And that's great. And for an army that's trying to deliver a bunch of different units into melee all at once, I think having access to this Holy Orb ability is very nice. So I would almost always have Holy Orb somewhere in my army, and sometimes I think there would be situations where you would try to build a unit specifically around delivering it if you need that fight last effects. Now, there's 2 that are pretty similar, and I'll talk about them together. The Icon of Heinemann and the Crux Obsidian. The Crux Obsidian subtracts 1 from the damage characteristic of attacks allocated to the model holding the relic. The Icon of Heinemann does the same thing, but it affects the armor penetration value of the attack. Now, the cool interaction here is that you can take them on a particularly resilient unit or model in your unit, and then allocate attacks to them in order to get the defensive effect. So it doesn't affect the entire unit, it's only affecting that one model, but you can extend that effect by allocating the relevant attacks to that guy. Now, obviously, as soon as you take a save during any phase, you have to continue to take saves during that phase until that model's dead. But the kicker is that when that model dies, you can bring them back with an apothecary. So that's pretty cool. There is also a stratagem that we'll talk about later that will add 1 to the wounds characteristic of a model in a unit, which means that you can get some additional resilience out of that model. So you can have a 4 wounds Terminator with a Storm Shield, ignoring AP1 and AP2, for example, or subtracting 1 from the damage of attacks. And that dude, your opponent rips into you with a Volkite Contemptor or something, that dude is just gonna tank a ton of those attacks, especially 2 damage attacks are just gonna get completely negated by the Crux Obsidian, especially. So I think it's kind of meta dependent, and it depends on the unit that you are assigning these to. Obviously, the icon works better on units with a better armor save, because you're going to be taking a 2+ save more often if you're putting it on a Terminator or on a Storm Shield guy who has a 2+ save. The Crux Obsidian probably works better on a unit with a model with multiple wounds. So if you're taking it on, a biker, for example, or a Centurion even, you can that -1 damage will be effective for longer. And then again, you can just bring those guys back with Apothecaries. So I think the interaction with Apothecaries is very important, and I think alongside the Chaplain that we're like starting every single Black Templars list with, you're probably also starting with an Apothecary, because you're going to have some important infantry units to heal with them, and a lot of times those infantry models can have these additional upgrades on them. We also have the Fist of Balthus, as well as the Beast Pyre and Bones of Mordred are all sort of weapon upgrades. The Fist of Balthus is a Power Fist upgrade. Gives you it's kind of a Hammer of Ball. It's removes the -1 to hit, makes you AP 3 for 3 damage. Thick. It's 10 points, I think. Yeah, 10 points on top of a Power Fist. If you have a Power Fist embedded in a unit somewhere, I would, and you're expecting to deliver them, I think I would take this a lot of the time. We also have the Beast Pyre it's an upgraded Flamer, gets you to, or a Pyre Blaster, which is a Primaris Crusader specific Flamer. Gives you essentially a couple extra points of strength plus 1 point of AP and some extra range if you're upgrading a regular Flamer for it. It's also Blast. All right. Seems fine. But I think the other interesting one is the Bones of Mordred, because this deals mortal wounds in addition to the model's melee attacks on unmodified wound rolls of 6. And the cool synergy here is with Lightning Claws. So if you have, for example, a Vanguard Veteran Sergeant with 2 Lightning Claws, that guy's coming in with 6 attacks on the charge, full rerolling his wound rolls, which means the chances that he gets 6s to wound are very high. So you are probably proccing 2 to 3 mortals every time that guy attacks with those 6 Lightning Claw attacks. And I would try to fit that in a lot of times, especially if I'm taking like a little Vanguard Veteran unit who I expect to do a lot of damage. You can also just put it on a guy with chainswords, right? Because it's not re-rolling your wounds, so your chances of dealing mortals are a little bit less. But if you're making like 6-ish attacks, this is dealing 1 to 2 additional mortal wounds every time you swing pretty consistently. And that's very nice. So I like the Bones of Mordred, especially if you have rerolls to wound. If you don't, it's not the end of the world, but as long as you have a high enough volume of attacks, I think the Bones of Mordred are very cool as well. So all of these abilities are very interesting. They give you the ability to kind of personalize all of your units. And I think building them into your list is going to be kind of the way forward, obviously. This is one of the detachment abilities that you have to make use of if you're trying to get the most out of your Black Templars chapter pick. So putting units in your army that are going to be that are going to utilize these abilities most effectively, I think, is the way to go. So, like we talked about before, the Crux and the Icon on resilient units that want to be taking those hits and, reducing the damage that's incoming and then regenerating the model with the Icon or the Relic, I think, is good. The Bones and the Fists potentially to come in and buff some melee units. I think those are all good. Plus, potentially a caddy for the Holy Orb to hit it on an enemy unit when you're making contact. So I would take 3 or 4 of these in almost every list for sure. So there are some data sheets in the supplement as well that we can talk about. Now, the one that was most disappointing to me, I think, is Chaplain Grimaldis. This poor guy. He just got a sweet new model with his new Cenobite servitors, and unfortunately for him, he's I don't know. He's been done dirty mechanically, I think. First of all, the Cenobite servitors are carrying all of his relics, so the power of the unit is dependent on how many servitors you have remaining. Unfortunately, well, I guess also fortunately, probably, the servitors have to be assigned wounds before Grimaldis himself does, which means that the more Grimaldis takes damage, the less effective he's going to be over the course of the game. That's not, that's how vehicles work, right? Like, that's not the end of the world, except these Cenobite servitors are like T4 or the 4+ save and 1 wound. So as soon as you attack a Grimaldis at all, as soon as he's open to being attacked whatsoever, he immediately will basically lose his war gear. That does make him kind of hard to kill in melee because you have to get through 3 idiots. If you're trying to hit him with a Thunderhammer or something, that's a lot of wounds that he's not going to be taking. But on the flip side, as soon as all of his buddies are dead, he's not that exciting. He's 4 attacks, goes up to 5 with Shock Assault. He's just got a regular Crozius, basically. Yeah, and he's just like a chaplain. Now, he does get, as long as his relics are alive, his effects are very good. He gets a 6+ damage ignore roll to everybody within 6 inches, or core characters within 6 inches. He also gives a bonus to advance rolls, which is very good because Black Templars do have a lot of synergy with advancing, especially they do have a stratagem to advance and fire their weapons without penalty, which is pretty good. You can also advance and fire rapid fire and pistol weapons after advancing with that stratagem, and being able to do that D3 plus 3 inches rather than a random D6 is pretty good. The downside is, like I said, as soon as those guys die, it's you don't get those abilities again. The other thing is that he gets +1 to recite litanies, and he knows Litany of Hate +2 litanies specifically from the Black Templars list of litanies, which means he can recite 2 of them because he's a Master of Sanctity. So he's a solid chaplain. The downside is that Master of Sanctity keyword, because in my head, I think a lot of the chaplains and a lot of the chapter command special characters have this problem. In my head, I'm like, oh well, if you wanted to take 2 chaplains, because you have so many litanies and so many of them are so powerful, you can have a Master of Sanctity with an Ancient Breviary plus Wise Orator to recite 2 litanies, rolling 2d6, picking the highest result for both of them, so which is a 1 in 9 chance to fail, and Grimaldis in here reciting 2 litanies with a 1 in 6 chance to fail, which means your litanies are very reliable. It's all good, except you can only have 1 Master of Sanctity in your army, so you can't do that. Grimaldis, I mean, it's the same for Cassius, I think, in Ultramarines. These character chaplains who I would love to take alongside a regular Master of Sanctity. The downside is that the regular Master of Sanctity is so much better at reciting litanies than Grimaldis is, and he doesn't randomly lose his +1 to cast and stuff like that. Now, the other issue with Grimaldis here is that the entire unit is character keyworded, as you can see, and that means that because the Assassinate secondary in GT 2021 scores you points for every character model you've destroyed, not character units, Grimaldis actually represents 9 points on Assassinate if you're able to kill him. It's not great, especially since, or 12 points, I guess, actually 12 points, because he has 3 servitors plus himself. And especially since all you have to do is basically get like 1 tactical marine into Grimaldis to just start getting a ton of assassinate points by killing his random servitors. Feels bad, man. So that's a big downside. I don't know if that would, like, since you're playing Space Marines, you often have 4 to 5 characters already, and taking Grimaldis just makes it so that you can, you might lose those assassinate points a little bit more quickly, but you often will give up assassinate playing Space Marines. That's not the end of the world. The downside is that I think if you were gonna take Chaplain for this points cost, you would just take a normal Chaplain. Grimaldis doesn't represent enough additional abilities over top of just being a good chaplain, I think. He does give you a deny. He sets himself back up on the table after he dies on a 4+. Unfortunately, after he does that, he's already assigned wounds to all of the servitors, so the servitors are all dead. So he's already lost all of his auras, essentially, as soon as he resets back on the table. So it's, you know, it is what it is. So it's unfortunate for Grimaldis. I was kind of hoping that he would see some play, but a unit that will definitely see some play, I think, is Highmarshal Helbrecht, the other special character who got a super sweet glow up with the new Black Templars release. This guy's absolutely phenomenal. He does take up your captain slot in a detachment, which is unfortunate. Actually, does he? He's a chapter master keyword. I'm gonna double check that real quick, chat, just so I don't misspeak. If he doesn't take up your captain slot, then actually I'm super in on this guy. This is chapter command. What is the rule where you're company command? You can only include one captain and 2 lieutenant models, but he's actually not captain keyword. Sick. All right, just kidding, chat. I'm totally misspeaking to you. You can take him with a regular captain, which is great because you can have a smash captain in your detachment, plus have Highmarshal Helbrecht in there as well. I'm in. I'm all in because this guy's super good. He is an incredible force multiplier. He gives +1 strength to core units within 6 inches of himself, which is phenomenal if you're going to be running him alongside sort of big crusade squads or even just Vanguard veterans or regular sort of melee infantry. +1 strength and all that stuff is just super duper good. Being going strength 4 to strength 5 is oftentimes +1 to wound, at least against T4 and T8, which are 2 very, very relevant breakpoints. He's also just got all the captain rules. He's Rites of Battle, and he has a chapter master aura, so he can pick something for to get full rerolls within 6 inches during the command phase. But he also late games like an absolute beast. His profile itself is sick. He's 8 wounds, being protected by Artificer Armor for a 2+ armor, 4+ invulnerable save, plus 6 base attacks, in addition to Shock Assault. So he's making 7 attacks. Those are either with a Strength 8, 3 flat damage profile, so basically a Thunder Hammer with no penalty, or he can one-hand swing them like Logan Grimnar and double his attacks to make a total of 14 attacks for 1 damage in Strength 6. Whoa! Highmarshal Helbrecht, calm down, bro. So this guy is a super strong late gamer. He can come in and blow up tanks and, you know, kill enemy characters with the best of them, but he's also giving out those auras in the early game. I think Helbrecht is phenomenal. I think he's super great. He's a little bit more expensive than a standard captain, but like we just talked about, you can also have a regular captain, so that's pretty good. I love this guy. We also have the Emperor's Champion, the last special character in the Codex. He's all right. He's a chapter champion, but he's a little bit upgraded. He's got a very good profile, 5 wounds, 5 attacks with that Primaris keyword, so you can protect him with stuff like Transhuman. So he's 6 attacks on the charge, and he gets a bunch of bonuses to fight characters. He has full hit and wound rerolls against characters. He fights first against characters, and he can heroically intervene 6 inches into characters. He can only heroically intervene if... he can only move 6 inches in his heroic intervention if he can end an engagement range of a character unit. So while he can be eligible to heroically intervene to give him some additional movement, and this is part of these weird sort of fight phase movement interactions are part of where Black Templars get their primary objective control out of, but so he can move 3 inches even if he's just within 6 inches of an enemy unit, but he can only go the additional 3 inches to go 6 inches if he ends in range of character. So keep that one in mind. He doesn't heroically intervene 6. He heroically intervenes within 6 and then moves 6 if there's a character there, and he can fight him. His sword is pretty cool. It does. It has a similar profile to Helbrecht. It gets to 3 damage if he gives himself -1 to hit, or he can just swing normally and get and have a 2 damage AP3 profile, which is fine. That's basically the relic sword that you'd be giving a chapter champion anyway, and he can upgrade it to flat 3 damage, and which isn't the end of the world, especially since if he's rerolling his hit rolls if he's fighting a character. So being -1 to hit's not the end of not the biggest of deals. Now, unfortunately for the Emperor Champion, he's actually very, like, unbuffable, essentially. He can't have any relics, because his armor and stuff is already considered to be relics. So you can't upgrade him really at all. And he has a weird interaction with warlord traits. He is a special character. His warlord trait is not set, but per the codex, he can only have a warlord trait out of the Black Templars set of warlord traits. The downside there is that normally when you're building out a Smash character, you're going to use the stratagem for an additional warlord trait if you choose that model as your warlord. That stratagem is locked to the Black Templars set of warlord traits. So since the Emperor's Champion's initial warlord trait has to be from the Black Templars set, upgrading it also you basically can't take any other warlord traits outside of that list of special traits. So you can't do things like give him a Black Templars trait plus Imperium Sword, which I think would be the number one. You could get him up to 7 attacks, 8 on the charge. I think that would be a pretty good way to do to go about it, but you can't do that. So I don't know. That's too bad. But I think generally speaking, it's unfortunate for the Emperor's Champion, because I know previously in previous versions of the Black Templars army, he was kind of designed as like the guy. He was the unit that the army was constructed around, and now he's just this dude who's like kind of a little nuclear missile, except he's only a foot infantryman. So his melee profile is good, and he'll cut the head off some characters, but for 100 points and taking up an HQ slot, which you only get 3 of if you're playing a single battalion, he doesn't force multiply at all. There's nothing. He doesn't recite litanies. He doesn't give rerolls. He doesn't do anything. He's just there. So that's unfortunate. I would just rather have a Smash Captain, since, as we just found out, you can have a Smash Captain with Helbrecht. That seems good to me. We got our Master's Sanctity, we got Helbrecht, we got our Smash Captain. The HQ choices are filled up. That's all we got. Now, we do have some infantry squads we should talk about when we're talking about the special data sheets in this book. We have the standard Crusader squad, which starts at up to 5 initiates, which are basically just exactly tactical marines. Their points cost has been updated, so they're no longer 15-point tactical marines, which was awesome for the little while that we had it. But you do have a pretty reasonable selection of special weapons. You can pick from the special weapons war gear to equip to these guys, and they can take neophytes, which are essentially just standard scouts, which have the scout war gear list. They can take shotguns and melee weapons and stuff like that. That's being compared to the new Primaris Crusader squad, which is constructed a little bit differently. So while the regular Crusader squad starts with 5 initiates and you can add neophytes on top of that, the Primaris Crusader squad is already constructed for you. So it comes with 5 initiates and 4 neophytes plus 1 sword brother. So it starts at 10 models. So there's already you're halfway there already. Interestingly, you can take up to 11 initiates and 8 neophytes, which means you're capped at 20, but the standard Crusader squad could take 10 neophytes, and this one's only 8. So you're stuck with a 12 to 8 ratio of initiates to neophytes. I don't know why. It must be. I guess that's just what's in the box, right? But it's a little bit strange that the the ratio is a little bit different. Interestingly, these guys can take auto bolt rifles. They can't take standard bolt rifles, and the auto bolt rifles cost some additional points, so they cost the same as an intercessor. The initiates also come with an Astartes chainsword and a heavy bolt pistol, which means they're almost exactly an assault intercessor, but for the exact same points cost essentially. Now, the Primaris initiates, or the neophytes, excuse me, compared to the firstborn neophytes, are significantly better. They're +1 wound, +1 attack over the standard neophytes, which is a very big deal, and it gives you the ability to take a large unit that can be affected by transhuman, can be affected by a lot of the damage ignore rolls that Black Templars are going to be able to give to these guys, and you have a lot of sort of ablative armor for either your special weapons or for your actual intercessors, because you can just take wounds off the neophytes and remove them. They don't really have any special abilities. They can take Pyre Blasters, which is their only special weapon option, which is just a 15-inch range flamer with a -1 to wound on it, which is pretty good. There's also, well, when we talk about some stratagems, there's kind of, I think, an intended use of the unit is to make a unit that is based around assault weapons. So using auto bolt rifles and specifically Astartes shotguns, and kind of buffing those guys up and using them as like kind of a mobile fire base. Now the downside is that they aren't, while they are, you know, statistically the same as intercessors, the initiates aren't themselves intercessors, so it's important to keep in mind that you don't have access to any of the intercessor keyworded stratagems. So while you might have a unit with a bunch of auto bolt rifles in them, you can't double tap them, and you can't double fight with the chainsword version because they aren't keyworded correctly. That said, being able to advance and shoot those things, and there's even a stratagem for +1 damage on the shotguns, which you know, gives you potentially 16 2-damage shots in addition to 36 of the auto bolt rifle shots. It's something. There's something going on there. I don't know if necessarily that's what you do, because I think generally a lot of the buffs associated with Black Templars are trying to encourage to get you into melee, but they are it's something you can do. Those are all of the data sheets we talked about besides the Sword Brethren. I don't think there's much to talk about in the Sword Brethren, unfortunately. I spent a little bit of time kind of racking my brain about how you would use these guys, and I thought for a hot minute, I was like, you can take 2 Lightning Claws on them. They're 3 base attacks apiece, so you could take, they have 6 attacks each, right? So 2 Lightning Claws would be pretty good on a unit, as long as you can, you know, you have it in a transport or something. Maybe there's just 5 of them and they're in an impulsor, and you're running them up the table, and they come out with 30 attacks with full rerolls. You know, it's more than a Vanguard Veteran squad. They're harder to deliver, but they're also relatively cheap, I think. They're 28 points. It's probably the same as Vanguard Veteran, but they are Primaris keyworded, so that's pretty good. The downside is that their War Gear section is an absolute nightmare. So your War Gear is essentially pre-picked for you. This must be just based on the models that come in the box, again, I would assume. And you can't deviate from it at all. So you're stuck with, you know, 1 Thunderhammer dude, 1 Lightning Claw dude, 1 Power Axe dude, 1 Mal dude, 1 Plasma Pistol dude, unless you just take all regular chainswords. And I'm not super into that, to be honest. They do have a cool rule where they don't get a downside from whatever value you've picked, which lets them, you know, benefit from cover and stuff like that. But no optionality really, besides, you know, taking these very specific war gear options. Pretty much turns me off from the unit, which is very unfortunate. On the top, you know, in addition as well, they're foot Space Marines that are not troops, so that's always a little bit awkward. It's a hard sell for the most part. Poor Sword Brethren, but that's all the data sheets gone through. So we can move on to talk about some of the interesting special abilities that we have in the Codex here. Moving all the way down, let's talk about Litanies of the Devout. After I take a quick drink. They do have a strat for Exploding Sixes chap. That is definitely, certainly the case. And let me tell you, if I was rolling 30 Lightning Claw attacks Exploding Sixes, I'd be all in on that unit. But it's Exploding Sixes on a sort of variety of attacks. It's also going to be a nightmare. If you're playing on a clock, it's going to be a nightmare to resolve that unit's attacks, because every model, either they're all crappy chainswords and you're overpaying for chainswords, or every model like gets resolved individually because they all have slightly different attacks. You're like, God. You know, potentially as a unit with, you know, a couple guys with chainswords delivering 1 like 3-attack Thunderhammer, maybe that's the case, but you're eating elite slots to do that could be spent on Vanguard Veterans, which is basically the same. They have less attacks, obviously, but they have a jump pack, which is a pretty big deal. So, same as bad. Elite slots are always in contention in a Space Marine army, and I don't think those guys are gonna make the cut. Now the litanies are where things get really very exciting, and I think, like I was saying before, if there was a situation where you would take multiple chaplains, or you would try to take multiple chaplains, I think these litanies are the reason for that. Now, the knowing the litanies kind of works like a psychic discipline, where you can replace all of your litany slots with litanies from this list. which means that you still potentially have access to Litanies of Battle if you need them on one of your chaplains. There's also a 2 CP stratagem to automatically cast one of your litanies in addition to your other litanies. It doesn't let you Inspiring Oratory like the Wise Orator does, where you oratory any other litany that you have access to, but it does mean that you can get an additional litany slot, and if you have a guy who's not Master of Sanctity, then you can get a litany off without having to roll that 3+, which is always a little bit scary. But I think specifically, getting retaining access to things like Catechism of Fire for the +1 to wound in melee, or Canticle of Hate for the additional 2 inches to charge, are, especially alongside that reroll, makes your charges out of Deep Strike and stuff super duper reliable. It's very important. So if you're building a list around that, I would still consider trying to fit those buffs into your army. But the Litanies of the Devout are super duper strong. We have one that just gives +1 attacks to a unit within 6. We have one that makes you unaffected by enemy psychic powers. So things like smites and stuff, you can entirely fizzle just by running a unit out in front of your army, saying it can't be hit by psychic powers, and an entire Thousand Suns army goes home and weeps. You also have Divine Protection, which gives you a 5+ damage ignore against everything, not just mortal wounds, which is super duper important. And Remorseless Persecution, which gives mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6 in the fight phase. So, which is it's nice. Whether or not it's better than just a flat +1 attack, or all of these defensive upgrades, I don't know. But the interesting, it's an interesting question of which of these you're going to take. I think Litany of Divine Protection is super solid. 5+ damage ignore roll on anything that's core keyworded is very good. Whether or not you're taking the +1 attack, the mortal wounds on 6s, or the Plea of Deliverance, unfortunately, I think is maybe a little bit too corner case to be super useful, because you select them after your after you build your list. So you don't know if you're up against something that's psychically powered, but it could be a meta call where, if you're worried about hitting Grey Knights or Thousand Suns or something like that, you can make your army essentially unaffected by at least smites. Things that hit the closest unit is unreasonably strong. As somebody who typically plays a faction that relies a lot on smites to deal a lot of damage, every time I see this effect, I have a minor heart attack, because I'm playing expecting to either be able to dig myself out of a hole using smites. If you've come off and you've engaged my guns, I can smite you off before it comes back to my shooting phase. Or I'm expecting that your units are being aggressive to be sandpapered wounds before I get to go. And having all of those things not work, potentially, is absolutely terrifying. So I think, in addition to some of the other anti-psychic effects that Black Templars have access to, I think there's something to be said for, if psychic powers were to become more powerful in the metagame, Black Templars, their stock going up a little bit. Travis Loads, can you give Synaptic Link to Harry Dan? Yes, of course. There's a rule at Octarius that says you don't have access to Synaptic Link abilities if your only Tyrannid's detachment is a super heavy auxiliary detachment, and somehow people have extrapolated that to mean that models in a super heavy auxiliary can't be targeted by Synaptic Links, which is it's just wrong. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. So moving on, we talk about some stratagems here as well. I think a lot of these we can mostly skip over. Things like Vicious Riposte, I think, are relatively bad. This effect isn't very good. You get a 5+, you deal a mortal wound after you die, but use it at the start of the fight phase. So your opponent already, it's not like when you take a casualty, you use it. So you may know how hard you're being hit, and you can potentially use the Vicious Riposte to deal a bunch of damage back to people. This is a bad stratagem. The Crusader's Wrath stratagem is the rending that all of the Space Marine chapters have, which is almost never used. And then we have some pre-game selection ones. So the Revered Repositories is the one to give a special issue war gear equivalent to one of your sergeants. Heir of Sigismund is the additional warlord trait we were talking about before. And Champion of the Feast is the one that we were talking about, which I do think is very important. That upgrades a sergeant or sword brother in your army to a little bit of a mini character. They get +1 attack, wound, and weapon skill. So they typically will go down to weapon skill 2. Unfortunately, it's not +1 to hit, so you can't use it to ignore penalties to hit. So if you're already like a 2+ weapon skill, you can't go down to a 1+, unfortunately. But you +1 attack and wound is very good, especially if, like we were talking about before, you want to use it to compound your defensive effects, or you can just use that guy, in addition to giving them a relic with the Revered Repositories to allow them to deal more damage. So you can actually soup up a unit champion pretty hardcore. You can use his stratagem to give them the stat buff. You can spend the points to give them the relic from the reliquary, and then you can also give them a relic from Revered Repositories, and that is pretty cool. Now, the most important ones in here, I think, Devout Push gets talked about a lot. It used to be the bread and butter of a Black Templar strategy. Previously, it gave you a pile-in move at the start of the fight phase, which means you could use it to engage yourself if you were unengaged. So you could advance and Devout Push into melee with somebody. You could use it like a heroic intervention. It was super duper powerful. Significantly less powerful now, unfortunately. You move 3 inches. You make a normal move of 3 inches. You either go towards the closest enemy unit or towards the closest objective marker. That's it. You can also use it to make a pile-in move if you're already in engagement. So if your opponent tries to connect with only part of your unit, you can use it to pile in an additional time to get more models in melee with them, or to maneuver around before they base you with their own pile-in. You can do some stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily get you, it's not quite as useful as moving while you're unengaged, I should say. There are going to be some situations where you can do interesting stuff with that Devout Push, where you can get charged by 2 enemy units and then use the Devout Push to unengage one of them and then interrupt to then pile out of range of them to engage you back. There's going to be situations where that stuff happens, and I think the better you are at navigating the fight phase, the more powerful the Devout Push is going to be. But for the most part, I think the stratagem is going to be used to affect primary objective scoring. So being able to sit one unit on a primary objective, have your opponent run their whole, a unit to come and grab it, and Devout Pushing additional models onto that objective, that's a really big deal. Just using it to get 3 inches up the table, or to put models that, with OBSEC auras or with objective secured on them onto objectives, all of those uses are going to be very important for Devout Push. And I think that stratagem, while it's significantly less powerful than it was, I think it's still worth considering. If you're playing Black Templars, the question almost is at the start of each one of your fight phases, which unit do I Devout Push rather than whether I Devout Push, because I think there's almost always a situation where the extra 3 inches is a big deal. And even your opponent having to consider a threat of activation of you just getting 3 inches of movement in their fight phase is a big deal as well, because consider that you have a unit of Vanguard veterans or a jetpack unit or something like that, or even a biker unit potentially, that can suddenly move 3 inches, then immediately in your movement phase move an additional, whatever their movement is in charge. It just adds 3 inches to their charge essentially for the future phase. You just have to use it beforehand, which means your opponent always has to be, has to consider that your units could be 3 inches closer than they were. So something that might be a 12-inch charge becomes a 9-inch charge with +2 to charge for mechanical plus a reroll, and suddenly everything's looking a little bit less safe on their side of the table. They have a 4+ deny, which they've retained. The Tenacious Assault, which they've retained, I think got a little bit of a debuff, but it allows you to block infantry or beasts from falling back on a 4+ if they are engaged with, interestingly, any Black Templars unit, which means you can trigger it on stuff like land speeder storms or bikers, like we said before. I think there's an argument to be made that almost every Black Templars army should have maybe a couple bikers in it, just to be able to apply these longer ranged effects. Having a unit of Outriders running around with the Holy Orb to fight last anybody they need to, and then maybe they hit a tank, the tank tries to fall back and shoot or something, and you're like, no, 4+, you stick. I think all of those are not a tank, an infantry unit. I'm thinking of like Scutarii, I think, that are going to fall back and shoot. And you're like, no, you stay put. The other one that's very important is Strength of Conviction, which is, we talked about this effect in the Octarius rules, and how powerful and important it was. It's a little bit less powerful than the Tyranid version. The Tyranid version is range restricted to models within 12 inches of synapse, but it also doubles your objective secured if you have it. This one just gives you objective secured full stop if you're a core unit. And I think this ability is very powerful. So it essentially allows you to extend the range of your Rites of War if you need it. If you are taking Rites of War. And potentially you could even, an argument could be made that you don't even take Rites of War in a Black Templars army because you have access to this in your command phase. Boom, immediately steal your opponent's objective with your objective secured stuff. So the use cases for this stratagem are, for example, if your opponent has a couple objective secured models on a side objective, maybe they're guarding a banner, maybe they're going to score a 15-point turn if you don't contest one of their objectives, you could give objective secured to a unit like Bikers, like Vanguard Veterans, a very fast unit, and then run them over and immediately take that objective away. Alternatively, if they've come up with objective secured models and they have obsect an objective away from you in your command phase, you start your command phase, get a CP from the start of your command phase, immediately spend that CP on this stratagem. You give objective secured to whatever units that you have on that objective, or one unit, to give yourself the objective secured effect on the objective. You steal that objective back from them, and then at the end of your command phase, you go to score. So then you're holding that objective for scoring. So in all those situations, this ability is amazing. You tend to take a reasonable amount of objective security in a Space Marine army anyway, and especially I think a lot of these Black Templar armies are going to be built around a core of like Crusader squads and these larger objective secured squads that are just troops. Alternatively, you can also, there's multiple ways to get objective secured in a Space Marine army elsewhere, but being able to do it anywhere on the table for 1 CP, I think, is real strong. So again, on top of these things like additional range on heroic interventions, the ability to move during the fight phase, the ability to get additional models onto objectives, turn those models into objective secured models, and in addition to having just larger units than other Space Marine chapters have access to, I think that is what gives Black Templars a kind of sub theme of being able to take objectives away from people and being very squirrely on the primary objective score. We talked a little bit about the Emperor's Will. That allows you to advance and fire your pistol, rapid fire, or assault weapons. You also don't suffer the penalty for advancing and firing assault weapons. Interestingly, you also don't suffer a penalty for advancing and firing your pistol or rapid fire weapons because the advancing and firing penalty is only tied to assault weapons. So all of your stuff will naturally ignore the -1 to hit. Advancing and firing rapid fire obviously is very important because they can get to within half range in order to trigger that rapid fire ability. So I think that's kind of nice, and it's not going to be used particularly often, but there are going to be situations where it's helpful. And I do think that they're trying to push you to taking like large units of auto bull rifle Crusader squads in order to advance around the table and shoot with them without penalty. That's also a little bit impacted by this incendiary shells, which turns Astartes shotguns into 2 damage. It's kind of cute, I guess. I think the most... You only see shotguns on... or standard Astartes shotguns on Scouts and Primaris Neophytes. I don't believe that there is anybody else who can take them. I looked at Sternguard Veterans. They don't have access. And so I think the most efficient applicator of this stratagem is the standard Scout Squad. Those also get outflank, which is pretty cute. So you can do things like outflank them off the table and then incendiary shell somebody for 22 damage attacks, potentially at AP1 if you're Tactical Doctrine. I don't know if it's good, but it is kind of adorable. And like we said before, you could take 8 shotguns in a neophyte on neophytes in a or potentially even 10, I guess, if you took them on standard neophytes in a regular Crusader squad. And then you could advance around the table with the Emperor's Will and ignore the advance and shoot penalty, and then also shoot the bolters on the initiates in that squad. So it's a couple of different ways to apply 22 damage shotgun shots onto people. While getting +1 damage on a bunch of random strength 4 attacks is probably worth a CP, I don't know if it's worth taking all those shotguns on neophytes. But I don't know, it's kind of cute. The other one that everyone likes to talk about, and this one was really kind of racking my brain, is this Shock and Awe stratagem, which lets you disembark from a Land Raider Crusader after it's moved. Unfortunately, you can't then move yourself. The unit that's disembarked, obviously. I really want this to be good. And I do think that there, I was gonna say that there's like no synergy between vehicles and Black Templars, and I was like, they don't have any vehicle stuff. They're not Iron Hands. Why would you take vehicles with them? And I remember they can give every vehicle in their army a 5+ invulnerable save, and I was like, they're a 5+ invulnerable save. They have that stalwart effect, which isn't great, but it helps against like the super heavy anti-tank stuff. And like they have access to smoke screen, plus they can like top bracket. So I'm trying to consider ways we could get a Land Raider Crusader to survive an Alpha Strike. I don't think it does it. I think almost every army in the game, if you line deploy a Land Raider Crusader, I think they can just kill it. But man, do I want it to be good. The downside of this especially, I think, is that Land Raider Crusaders only move 10 inches. And because the unit disembarking from them cannot then move themselves, the upside of taking a Land Raider Crusader with a bunch of models in it would be to go first, win that roll off to go first, blitz a Land Raider Crusader up the table, disembark, and charge your opponent's line on turn 1. Unfortunately, the math isn't quite there. You're 24 inches apart, which means after a 3-inch disembark off a 10-inch move, you're going to be 11 inches away. So you can declare a charge, but the chances you succeed are very low. You can give them +2 to charge with the Canticle of Hate. You can also potentially be 3 inches farther forward if you have Abhor the Witch, and you get the reroll charge from being Black Templars. But like banking your whole game plan on like a 9-inch charge isn't amazing. And I'm not sure that a single Land Raider Crusader on your side of the table has like the Drukhari effect where you can run it into the middle of the table and then be like okay with it dying because at least your guys will get stuck in, because that a Land Raider Crusader is not a raider. It's 265 points, so plus probably a 200 or 300 point unit that you're delivering inside it. It's like a 500 point module, and it's very sad. So man, Black Templars players, I'm pulling for you with the Land Raider Crusader disembark, but I think if you could move after disembarking with this, I think it would be maybe legitimately good, because your Alpha Strike would be super hardcore, but the fact that you can't is very unfortunate. Unfortunate. Too bad. Too bad. So the last one's over here. Bombastic Delivery is the one we talked about a little bit before. Gets you an automatic success on a litany, then you get an additional recite, so it's a little bit of I guess it's a side grade of Inspiring Oratory, because the Inspiring Oratory, you can do any litany and it goes off, whereas, but you do it instead of reciting your litany normally, whereas this one gives you the additional cast, but you have to know the litany in order to do it. Like I said, I think it gives you a little bit more consistency if you're taking multiple chaplains, but given that your first chaplain's probably going to be Ancient Breviaried, the chances it's a 1 in 9 chance they fail the litany, which means you're probably fine just rolling it. It does let you do your 2 litanies plus a Litany of Hate as well to give the reroll and melee aura, which is pretty nice, but for 2 CP, that's a lot. There's going to be situations where you use it, but not every time. Lastly, we have Heretic's Pyre, which is essentially turns all of your flamer weapons in a unit into blast weapons. Interestingly, it doesn't do that. It it gives them the verbiage of being a blast weapon, but you don't get the blast keyword, which means Eat Your Heart Out Adeptus Mechanicus, stuff that's immune to blast, doesn't ignore the Heretic's Pyre, which I think is pretty cool. It does give you a little bit of a silver bullet to stuff like big Scutarii, veteran Scutarii Vanguard squads, because you can pump out a bunch of flamethrowers with a big AP and just rinse them down. Unfortunately, those big Scutarii Vanguard squads are still tough enough that you probably don't actually kill them. But I think if that's a meta consideration that becomes relevant, having a unit like a Stern Guard veteran squad with combi flamers, even assault centurions. I think I've seen people using with the stratagem because they sort of randomly also have a bunch of flamer weapons on them, and then being able to max those attacks into a big squad like those vanguards, I think is a very big deal. Whether or not that's it's worth building for that, I'm not sure. There's going to be situations where you have a unit that has 2 or 3 flamers in it, and you just want the additional attacks out of it for 1 CP, which will be fine. I don't know about building around it, but I do think the option is there if you ever need to absolutely rinse down some big units of guys, and especially since if they're immune to blast weapons, this thing not actually giving you blast is very relevant. So that's all the stratagems out of the way. We'll talk about real quick. We do have some warlord traits here. I don't think that they're too exciting. Interestingly, we have Master of Arms, which gives you fight first, which is great, and a +1 attack. The +1 attack warlord traits are always great because you can stack them with Imperium Sword if you're building a Smash character. So you can have +2 attacks with whatever weapon you've taken. So you can imagine like a Teeth of Terra Smash Captain is coming in with 10 attacks. That seems pretty okay. Fighting first is also very good as well. If your opponent can't kill you before you would go to swing again, fighting first in their turn is always awesome. So if they can't remove the Smash character after they've committed, then you're doing great. So I think Master of Arms plus Imperium Sword is probably going to be a pretty common combination. We also have access to +1 strength, but it's a little bit less exciting. Toughness 8 isn't a huge breakpoint right now, so having a Thunderhammer is just fine at strength 8 for the most part. Frontline Commander, I think, is the other interesting one. If you don't have a Canticle of Hate in your army and you aren't relying on the Canticle of Hate effect, I think having a Frontline Commander is very good. It gives the Commander themselves +1 to advance and charge, and it gives you +1 to charge anything that they're engaging. So I think this is best used on a fast character, so a Biker or a Jump Pack character. I'm thinking if you take a Primaris Bike Chaplain and they're taking Wise Orator as one of their warlord traits, if they're your warlord, you can upgrade them to also have Frontline Commander, and then they're moving 14 +1 to charge, so they often get in, and then they're giving everybody else +1 to charge that's coming in with them, which I think is pretty handy. That's a situation that you would absolutely not use Suffer Not the Unclean to Live, though, because as soon as that guy went in to provide the +1 to charge buff against the thing he was engaging, your other units have to charge other stuff. They can still declare the original unit as a charge target, but they have to also get in on whatever else they charged. And that's a little bit awkward. But having access to that +1 to charge ability, especially since you already have rerolls, is pretty good. There's no advance in charge anywhere in the Codex, which is unfortunate, but there are a lot of charge buffs, this being one of them, and then also everything having the access to the rerolls is pretty handy. Lastly, the relics are certainly worth talking about. There's some really cute ones in here. Breath of the Throne, I think, is super cute. It's a D3 +3 shot flamer, and it upgrades the flamer half of a combi flamer or an auto flamer, which I learned today was a thing, which is an auto bolt rifle with a flamer attached to it. It makes it 2 damage, a strength 5, AP1, 2 damage, D3 +3 attacks. I wish it increased your range because you could use it on like a more of a support character, and they could be flaming people from, like, if it was 15 inches, I'd be into it. For the most part, I think it's very cute, but having a 2 damage flamethrower is like pretty sweet. We also have, grab my notes here real quick. So the important ones to talk about, I think, Sword of Judgment, Skull of the Cacodaminus are all, as well as Witchseeker Bolts, are all the special issue war gear that can be given to sergeants. The Sword of Judgment, I think, is the most important one. It gives you a 3 damage power sword. So it's basically it's almost exactly the Blazing Blade, I think, although that one's AP5, but if I remember correctly. But having an AP3 3 damage weapon in the middle of your Blade Guard veteran squad, or even just a Crusader squad that your squad is delivering, I think is pretty impactful, especially since you can be upgrading the guy who's carrying it with that +1 attack and +1 wound. So you can be making 5 attacks with this thing in just a regular squad, not even a character. The Skull of the Cacodominus is also an interesting one. It's 12-inch -1 to cast, and you perils on any double aura. In addition, you can add a second aura once per game on top of it that gives it an 18-inch range -1 to cast, which is cumulative with the other 12-inch range -1 to cast. So for one turn, you get to super mess up people's psychic tests if they're very close to you. It seems to me like the best use of that is going to be on a forward deploy unit, so like an incursor squad that's starting up the table, and for one turn you get to ram them up into your opponent's face. You know, maybe they run onto an objective, you pop the Skull of the Cacodominus, and then everybody within 18 inches of them, it's just a shadow in the warp aura, essentially, which is can be absolutely brutal if you're built around taking those psychic tests, and suddenly your opponent's like, you're like 8% less likely to pass any one of your dozen psychic tests. That's going to cause some failures, and that's going to be a pain. So I think that being a special issue war gear is a pretty big deal. And I think it's again, like all of the other psychic stuff. This is, and these relics like these are the reason I don't like locked pre-games, unfortunately, in 9th edition. But the situations where it's so meta dependent when you're going to take these, because psychers have to be relevant for you to want to spend the CP to have this. But if they are, having it is going to be pretty nice, especially since you already want to put a unit up in front if you're protecting against powerful psychic powers, because you want to project that 4+ deny stratagem up the table as well. So you're already incentivized to play like this with a Black Templars army, and this will just compound your anti-psychic defense. But obviously the downside being that if your opponent has no psychers and they wanted to unlock a Pour the Witch for themselves, so they left all their librarians at home, this does nothing, and you've wasted a CP, and you feel bad about yourself. Now there are some decent ones for just for standard characters. Tannhauser's Bones, I think, is an important one. It reduces damage characteristics of attacks against you 2-1. Now, this is a regular relic. You can only give it to a character, but it means you can make a super duper tanky, like a bike captain, for example, can be super tough to kill. Even like a Gravis armored captain, you know, who have 7 wounds, I think, meaning like having to attack them 7 times to kill them, or get 7 full attacks through an invulnerable save, is super tough. It doesn't make you any more resilient against mortal wounds, which is unfortunate. Although you do have the 5+ against mortal wounds for being a Black Templar, which is pretty cool. I think that there's going to be situations where this relic absolutely neuters a lot of armies, especially, you know, if you're in a fight with another character and they're trying to get Thunderhammer attacks through on you, and it takes you 1 billion Thunderhammer attacks to kill you. 5 or 6 Thunderhammer attacks potentially. That's super tough. And I think there's also a Space Marine Warlord trait for +1 wound and a 6+ damage ignore, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Iron Resolve. So you can get a character up to like 8 wounds with a 6+ ignore, and then make all attacks against them 1 damage. So this dude just eats like 8 las cannon shots through his invulnerable save before he dies. It takes like an entire AdMech army to kill that dude. I really like that relic. That's a super duper good one. The Aurelian Shroud is also one that used to be super good, a little bit less so. It gives you 4+ invulnerable save to infantry within 3 inches of you once per game. I like the wording on it because you can use it at the start of any command phase, which means the downside of a lot of the times with these activated defensive abilities is that if you go second, they're not active when your opponent attacks you. But they fixed it. They found a way around. Unfortunately, we still have dozens of these effects in the game that don't work like that, and it just increases sort of the alpha strike nature of 40k that much more. But this one is worded correctly. The downside is that most infantry units in a Space Marine army have a 4+ invulnerable save already, because they are Storm Shield guys, typically. You know, Blade Guard veterans, Vanguard veterans, all those frontline units are already going to have the save. And most of the time, I would imagine you're already taking a 5+ save off of your Vow, which means you're using a relic slot for +1 invulnerable save on some of your infantry, which I don't love. This used to affect all core units. In the previous version, it also gave the 4+ invulnerable save to dreadnoughts, which was absolutely baller. Not so much anymore. So I'm a little bit less excited about the Aurelian Shroud. Crusader's Helm gives you extra 3 inches on your auras, and you get to pick somebody to be in Assault Doctrine for a round. I think that's fine, but unfortunately you don't get any additional bonus from being in Assault Doctrine. So Assault Doctrine, any of the abilities that set you back into Assault Doctrine in this codex are just +1 AP, which is, I mean, it's okay. The Witchseeker bolts are the special bolt weapon for Black Templars that you can shoot Psyker characters and they deal D3 mortal wounds against Psyker characters. I'm not super excited about it. Maybe if it's on an eliminator who has like a good gun, and you're like D3 mortals plus the regular mortals on a Psyker character. You can't take it with like any of the relic or sniper rifles. So I'm not super into the Witch Seekers. It is good against like the armies that have a lot of non-character Psykers. It is good against them because just being able to ping like a random strike squad and like killing a guy in addition to normal damage is very good. So I'll give it in the Black Templars or the Grey Knights matchup. I think that's probably a solid relic. But unfortunately, it's like the other ones where if you're not playing against Psykers, it doesn't do anything. And that's very unfortunate. And unlike the Skull of the Cacodominus, the effect isn't quite as like powerful. So you're just smiting something every once in a while for a CP if you're in the right matchup rather than potentially really disrupting their game plan quite a bit. Witchseeker on a Vindicare? You can't put them on Vindicares, unfortunately. Only Black Templars characters, chat. Only Black Templars characters. All right, so we've done it. We've talked about all of the things in the supplement, chat. I have a couple thoughts before we move on about the faction in general. I think this certainly isn't. I mean, it's no Blood Angels. Thank goodness. It's not like a huge nerf to the faction, and I do think there's some powerful effects in here. Specifically, like the Templar vows really change how you have to approach the matchup. Like giving everything stalwart and potentially an invulnerable save is really good. And there's definitely going to be some situations where you'd be like, you got a bunch of tanks and they all have invulnerable saves, and they're just like, get wrecked. I think that's solid. But I don't think the supplement is super powerful. Nothing in here jumps out as like, you know, the next like Iron Hands Vulcan Tempt, like character Vulcan Tempter kind of thing. I do think I think what Black Templars are going to be great at is like fighting a regular game of 40k. So if your opponent wants to come into your Black Templars army and fight fair, where you both run into the middle of the table and hit each other with sticks, the Black Templars army is going to win 9 times out of 10, I think, in that fight. They have so many small advantages and effects that will make them so much more effective in that fight. You know, between fight phase manipulation, stuff like the Holy Orb, stuff like moving around the table with Devout Push, but then also being able to just steal objectives away from people and having those big OBSEC units, I think those are all going to be phenomenal. The downside is that 40k right now is played, you know, most of the damage in 40k is done in the shooting phase when an army with a billion guns lights up another army that's on the other side of the table from them. And while Black Templars do get to be very tanky, and there are going to be some matchups where they're just going to tank a billion damage, you know, you can imagine these big units with the relic to reduce damage on them, you know, sitting in cover with a good armor save, and squig buggies are just bouncing off of them, or the ignore AP1 and AP2 thing, you know, just eating a ton of attacks on a 2+ save from a bunch of little attacks. I think that's going to be good, but being resilient doesn't necessarily win you the game unless you're also in the, you know, being resilient in the right place. And while Black Templars do have a little bit of like threat range mitigation because they have the ability to move around the table and use Devout Push and reroll their charges and stuff like that, I don't know if that's enough on what is otherwise just a regular Space Marine army. If Black Templars had if like just Seal of Oath exists, or Tome of the Ectoclades just existed in Black Templars, I think this faction would be sweet. I think if they had something that would help them shoot the turn that they needed to close the distance, I think that would help a lot. But I think right now what's going to happen is that they're going to pop out. Space Marine shooting without any super big buffs isn't that great. It's very good, don't get me wrong. But, you know, a lot of the times we see Space Marine shooting and it's like Iron Hands with every buff assigned to them, or, you know, Salamanders with +1 to wound and double tapping and all this stuff. And Black Templars have none of that, so they're just shooting normal attacks at you. And normal Space Marine attacks are not that exciting. Once they get into melee, things change, but they got to get there, and I think that's going to be the tough part for Black Templars. So they definitely don't look like one of the strongest Space Marine supplements. Don't get me wrong, there are no Imperial Fists. I think the supplement has some really cool stuff in it, and really good stuff, but I'm not expecting them to really like blow up the metagame. I'm happy to be proven wrong, though, because I do think like the finesse of a lot of the abilities, you know, being able to, you know, do your wound allocation correctly so you make the most use out of your relics, then respawning your models, like getting additional distance off respawns and using devout pushes to get onto objectives, then give yourself objective secured to take the objectives. All of that stuff is super cool. Whether or not that means you're going to win GTs with it, it'll be a little tough, I think. But certainly I'm pulling for you. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Black Templars, chat. Let's talk with chat. How's it going, everybody? Thanks, everybody, for watching, by the way. I appreciate everyone coming on. We got 69 concurrence on right now. Oh, somebody joined at 70 now. Damn it. Chat. The worst. Yeah, I don't know. I think it has fun. The giveaway says orcs, by the way. Does it? No, it doesn't. Is the link wrong? Oh, it is. Weird. I apologize, chat. Let me get that fixed on the giveaway thing. Why is it? Let me see if the giveaway is fixed here. The link is correct on my end. I don't know why it's posting the wrong link. That's super bizarre. They do have... Oh, yeah, that's a good... Why does it say orcs? Oh, maybe it's a title on the giveaway page? No? Oh, I found it. Okay. Okay. That should be fixed now. Thanks for the shout out, chat. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's a good interaction we should talk about. Yeah, so Devout Push gives you a normal move. And a normal move, if you end in a position where you can embark on a transport, you can embark on a transport after any normal move. Which means you can use Devout Push in really interesting ways. You can disembark from a transport, potentially even a Land Raider Crusader after it's moved. Oh, chat. The combos. You can disembark the unit, shoot with it, then immediately after the shooting phase, you get a charge phase, you charge your stuff, you get a fight phase, you say, I'm going to Devout Push this unit. You put them, so we'll just do a little thing here. So there's an objective marker here, right, chat? We'll give it a little O. There's a, I don't know, your Land Raider or whatever. Land Raider. And then you have your unit that disembarks from the Land Raider and stands here. You can make a normal move towards the nearest objective marker. So they go towards the objective marker to get within 3 inches of the Land Raider. Then they embark into the Land Raider because they finished a normal move in range of it. That's actually very cool. Transport Space Marines isn't super great right now, but you could just, actually use it to jump into buildings. If you have an objective inside a building and you jump out to shoot and then jump back in the building, you can do that. I think that use of Devout Push is super interesting and super cool. I don't know what the best use the best use case of that would be. Maybe just a Devastator squad or something that's relatively small. But that's definitely something to consider for sure. 100%. If only you could embark back onto a drop pod. That would be super sweet. All right, so I'm just gonna go back through chat here, and we'll cover stuff that people have said. The summary for the vow in the last page of the Codex specifies that the uphold the honor of the Emperor does not receive light or heavy cover. Yeah, I don't know. The summaries are often different than the actual rule. That's like not the first time that's ever happened. I think it needs clarification, in my opinion. It would be super duper powerful if it did dense cover, though. Aaron pointing out that the Curse Custodian is extra good for Gravis since they have a strat for +1 to saves already against 1 damage attacks. Yeah, so you can reduce damage to 1 and then use that to buff your saves. I agree. That is a super cool interaction. Gravis armored units are a little bit awkward right now. You do have this synergy with like Flamestorm Aggressors and the Stratagem to give you Blast. It does cost 2 CP if you're targeting aggressors with it. But you may already be taking like Inceptors in the army, and Inceptors do have the problem where like they drop down and they kill something and then they immediately get vaporized, and being able to buff their survivability and let them shoot multiple times because their attacks are so powerful, that's definitely a wombo combo. I think that could be very powerful. Only infantry and bikes can take the relics. Yes, that's correct. Non-character infantry and bikes, it's important to note as well. You can't add them. You can't use them to buff the infantry and the bikes. Travis asked about Harry Dan. We talked about Harry Dan a little bit already. Aaron pointing out Tenacious. The Tenacious Assault to drop fallbacks used to be on a 2+. Yeah, it was much more reliable in the past. I do remember that. And it's less good now. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the kind of defining stratagems of the chapter got a little bit... I mean, they got huge nerfs. Like, because the Tenacious Assault and the Devout Push, I guess a little bit on the 4+ deny as well, were sort of the... Like, they were the things that Black Templars did in 8th edition. And they get extra stuff now. They get the relics and they get the vows, which are super interesting and cool and unique. But man, I wish they could still old school Devout Push. I'd be all in on Black Templars if they could old school Devout Push. I think they'd be super powerful. Mike asking if you have a jump chaplain or a Terminator chaplain, if you bring them in after Deep Strike, if you bring them in Deep Strike after the command phase, can you use Bombastic Delivery? No. Bombastic Delivery is restricted to your command phase. Oh, that's Commanding Oratory. Let's grab it. So Bombastic Delivery is specifically in your command phase. It's not just when a chaplain recites a litany, in which case you could, I think, combo it with a Commanding Oratory. I don't know how you would do that. You would just get an additional litany outside of your command phase, I guess. But yeah, it has to be your command phase. Do I think Primaris Sword Brethren are any good? I don't think so. We talked about them a little bit, but I think there's a lot of downsides in the Sword Brethren. The fact that you can't optimize their weapon loadout. You either have chain swords or you have this bizarre combination of weapons is a little bit unfortunate, I think. On top of that, like, they're just foot Space Marines that with no defensive technology. They just like are protected by transhuman and a hope and a dream. So there's going to be a lot. I mean, as soon as they commit, they're probably all going to die, unfortunately. If you could like super duper load them out with Thunderhammers or with Lightning Claws or something, and they just traded for things, I think the unit would be very good. But their attacks are are not consistent enough, in my opinion. Oh, did I misspeak there, chat? The Blazing Blade is 2 damage? Let's go back. Is that a chapter relic? Oh, Burning Blade is 2 damage. Was I thinking of the chapter command sword? When I talked about that? Yeah, okay. So the Blade of Triumph is basically identical to the Sword of Judgment. That's the one I was thinking about, chat. Not the Blazing Blade. Yeah, the Blazing Blade is the AP5 one, but it's only 2 damage. But they're all strength 7, which is interesting. I think it's interesting that none of the sword relics ever get to strength 8, which is, I don't know, it's pretty cool, I guess. Praetor, talking about Tannhauser's, the Tannhauser relic. What is it? Tannhauser's Bones? Is that what it's called? Tannhauser's Bones on a bike chaplain. You have to lose your Ancient Breviary, though. I think I mentioned the Ancient Breviary when we were talking about the Litanies, but I think it's also important to note that I think it's the most important relic in the chapter, probably. Every time you do a Litany, you roll 2 dice and discard one of them. So it goes from a 2 and 3 chance to successfully cast a Litany to a 8 in 9 chance. So it's a massive increase in how reliable your chaplain is, and that's super important because you're going to be putting it on your Master of Sanctity, who's going to be reciting two litanies. So you pull double duty out of that. Or I guess if you're also getting the +1 from Wise Order, then it's a 1 in 36 to fail. So that's super good. Oh no, he just rerolls, right? Now? No, he's +1 now. It used to be they reroll. Yeah, so it's a standard chaplain is 8 in 9 to get a litany off with the breviary. Once you put the Wise Order on him, it is a 1 in 30 or a 35 in 36 chance to get your litanies off. It's almost guaranteed to get your litanies off. And I think the litanies are so powerful. I think the factions are like sort of designed around the litanies. I think you have to take the Ancient Breviary on your chaplain. But if you have 2 chaplains, which Seeker could be good on a Tech Marine if you take Run-Win Redemptors? I could see that. I think the Tech Marine, their guns are a little bit short range, so if you're using it to character hunt, it's a little bit less exciting. But if you are playing in a meta that has a lot of Grey Knights and a lot of Thousand Sons, which, to be fair, is a lot of metas right now, or even just, Tyranids are seeing more play now that Octarius came out, so there's a bunch of Hive Tyrants running around, and just having random D3 Mortal Wounds on top of that, I think it would help. So, yeah, if you don't have another relic on your Tech Marine and you've got a thing for it, and he's got his little shoulder Predator gun that you can load with the Witchseeker bolts, that seems fine. Let's see. Jaegerbomb, any lore updates? I'm going to be honest, Jaegerbomb. I didn't know what the lore was to begin with, so I don't know what the new lore. I don't know if there are any changes. I'm sorry. You could use a DaysCon. You could use the Devout Push to embark back on a Termite drill. I'd buy that. Yeah, the restriction is that you can disembark in the same, you just can't re-embark in the same phase, right? I'm gonna be honest. Every time a transport rule comes up, I have to read the transport rules because they're so complicated. A unit can embark in a transport that is engagement range. Yeah. So you could, theoretically, you could set up the Termite, pull the guys out of it, shoot, and then get back in the Termite, I guess, would be the idea. Assuming that you could do it next to the most awkward part is like while playing around screening, being able to put their units like such that they go towards an objective marker in such a way that the Termite they get inside the Termite drill. I actually think it's probably not that hard, to be honest. They just go towards the closest objective marker, so you just have to make it so that you don't set up closer to an enemy objective marker than your own objective marker, because then they can If they're slightly closer to your own objective marker, they can move towards it. You can put the termite drill behind them, and they would just get in the termite drill. Actually, they wouldn't have to, right? Because they've already disembarked within 3. So that actually it doesn't matter because they'll just move 0 and then end the move and get back in. Yeah. So I don't know what I'm talking about. Ignore me. Revenant, what does a competitive Black Templars army look like? So I think that most of the... I don't think they're going to look significantly different from any other Space Marine army. They may have... there may be more of an emphasis on troops in that they'll take, 1 or 2 Crusade squads instead of, regular incursors or whatever, in order to give them some breadth of models. But I think the normal Space Marine archetypes that you see, whether they're focused on Vanguard veterans and Blade Guard veterans, or whether they're focused on Dreadnoughts and stuff with guns, I think that's mostly still going to be how you play with Black Templars. And we just talked about Devout Push for ages. One of the interesting things about Devout Push is that it used to be infantry only, and now you can do it with anybody. So you can use it to move your Dreadnoughts around too. Any core unit is, I believe, I just moved it back to the core rules. Any core unit, I think, is the... core or character is the restriction, but it used to be specifically infantry. So there are some pretty powerful buffs for Dreadnoughts in Black Templars. They don't buff their damage output really at all, except in melee. But having that stalwart effect plus a 5+ vulnerable save plus the ability to shift them around, I think is super good. So I think those are still going to be how you build them. They're just going to have, there's going to be more of a focus on these little individual relics and stuff like that. Especially on those big beefy Blade Guard units or Vanguard units. So there's going to be a Black Templars flavor, but I think the stuff that's already good in Space Marines isn't not going to be good in Black Templars. You're still going to take the stuff that's good, I think. Deus Swire, Primaris, or Brother in 3 wounds. That would make them much better for sure. I agree. What's the thing that turns all incoming damage to 1? Tannhauser's Bones. There it is. Tannhauser's Bones. It's characters only though, so you can't put it on the units or anything. On a Judiciar, I could see that for sure, and the extra 6-inch heroic intervention, very good. You could also put Crusader's Helm on the Judiciar to increase the range of their Tempora Mortis. I think that's also pretty relevant combo. When does a Tempora Mortis trigger? Does it start a fight phase? So your opponent you couldn't devout push somebody, unless it was your turn, you couldn't devout push somebody into Tempora Mortis range, right? Judiciar. The biggest problem with the Judiciar, I think, is that it's fighting with an Apothecary for the elite slot. I think if Judiciars were not elites, if they were literally any other slot besides HQ maybe, you would see them all the frickin' time. At the start of the fight phase. Okay, so it's the same timing as Devout Push, right? Why do I keep clicking on the wrong stratagems page, chat? At the start of the fight phase, yeah. So if it's your opponent's turn, they would sequence the triggers in the way that works worse for you. But if it's in your turn, you could Devout Push somebody into range into Tempora Mortis. That's cool. I like it. Aaron, what are my thoughts on Assault Terminators as Black Templar? Give them Thunderhammers and Sigismund Steel if you want something super dead. I don't dislike that. I think Assault Terminators are probably a very good place to go, especially in that they're a very resilient unit, and you can push up their resilience with all of the relics, the protective relics. I think Sigismund Steel is probably best on them because they can teleport, but even then, it's only a 75%er or 78%er that they make a charge out of Deep Strike if you have +2 to charge. So you're assuming they also have Canticle of Hate and your opponent's not screening you so that you can Deep Strike on something. But otherwise, you don't really have a way to deliver them. And and it's wishful thinking to assume that even a Terminator unit will survive like more than one turn as soon as it's committed. So if your opponent doesn't give you the Sigismund Seal target, it's going to be really hard to get use out of that. But I think there's definitely going to be situations where it's like super good. If your opponent's like, here's my knights list, and you're like, watch me deep strike and blow up a friggin' Castellan or something, get wrecked. I think that'd be good. So I think if I were to use Sigismund Seal anywhere, it would either be on them or it would be just on a unit that's very fast. So it's less good on like Vanguard veterans because you're already taking Lightning Claws. But even like I've talked about Outriders a couple times, like even like an Outrider squad, just being move 14 and zipping around the table, to like, you know, kill a particularly annoying unit that your opponent has, I think is going to be good. But otherwise, you know, I don't know how often you can actually get use out of that reroll ability. Let's see. I'm going down to the end of the chat here. Revenant, thoughts on Thunderhammer Naders with Champion of the Feast and Icon of Heinemann? I do like that. I think I like that more than the Sigismund Seal, for sure. Because like the 4-wound Terminator dude who's gonna eat 1 billion damage before he dies, and then he's gonna get revived, is super tough. And that you're always gonna get use out of a unit being harder to kill, because your opponent has to attack them whether or not they come out of deep strike and make their charge. Your opponent has to kill them immediately, and that dude being ridiculously tough to kill is super good. I think that's very nice. So I'm kind of in on Hammer Naders in Black Templars. There's not many other places where I think you would see them, but because you can like, they have a good profile that synergizes well with the relics you can give them, and being able to like skyrocket that survivability through the roof, I think is really solid. I would love them to be in a Land Raider Crusader and then move it, and then they disembark and charge. Like that's what I want to do, but I don't think Land Raider Crusaders are quite there, unfortunately. Dreadlists with Grimaldis. I do think that if Grimaldis were to be anywhere, Dreadlist is probably the best place for him. Because they're already, like, he has ample things to get lookouts off of. It's also important to keep in mind that you can bodyguard Grimaldis' unit. So he can do, like, the thing that Celestine does, where he, like, chains out his unit, and he gets bodyguarded from way in the back, and then he's, like, inshootable way out, which is kind of cute, but he doesn't deal as much damage as Celestine, for sure. But giving it the 6+ damage ignore to everything within 6 is it is a pretty big deal for the Dreadnoughts, for sure. I don't hate that. Which unit would I put a Holy Aura on? A gunline or a melee unit? I mean, it's a melee ability, so you're going to get the most use out of it on a unit that's going to be close to your opponent, because it only goes 6 inches, right? So I think having it on like a unit that's going to be problem solving for you is really good. So whether that's like 5 Vanguard veterans or a little bike squad that's in the back or something, I think those are the places where you're going to get the most use out of it. Because there's situations both when you want to stop and interrupt, so you got to go in, and the unit that you're going to multi-charge, you have to move a unit up to hit them. Or you want to play through an opposing fight last. So you say you have something like Incubi up in the front of your opponent's army, and you don't want to get boned by a fight last on them if they trigger their Tormentors on you. So you have to advance super far forward and hit them with the Holy Orb. Those are like the two instances where you get the most use out of it. And in both instances, having a unit that's fast, either to advance far up the table to hit your opponent aggressively with it, or that can bounce around wherever your line you need it, you're going to get the most use out of it. So in my opinion, I would put it on a faster like melee unit. But certainly, I mean, wherever you have a good spot for it, I think is handy. You can use it more defensively if you have it just on a unit of dudes who are like hanging out with your characters, so that you can fight without your opponent being able to interrupt. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. So I think that's if there's no more questions from chat, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up pretty shortly here. So everybody get that input in. But I've generally been very enjoying these little Monday streams, some little Monday stream action going on, and I think the plan is going to be to continue them around the same time going forward. As long as we have stuff to talk about on Mondays, then I will continue them. I think they've been super fun. I really did want to talk about Black Templars because there's been so much buzz around them, especially in the comment section. So many people interested in Black Templars. Plus, we're giving some away this month, so exclamation point giveaway, by the way, chat, if everybody hasn't joined on there quite yet. That I think we had to talk about them today. Going forward, I don't know what I'll talk about. Maybe some more Tyranid stuff. I'm hoping, if I can get some time this week, I'm hoping to grind a bunch of games. I played a super interesting list over the weekend. Triple Barbed Iridol, chat. I put it on the table, and with the buffs from Arctarius, that unit is pretty good. So I'm hoping to play like a couple different Tyranid lists and maybe talk about those. When I do events on the weekends, we can talk about the events too. But yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed this Black Templars coverage. I am excited. Oh, by the way, I joined on Tabletop Simulator. I joined Alpha League. So anyone who wants to watch my games over there, I stream them over on the Twitch channel, so twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. And two of the players in my pod that I'll play against are playing Black Templars. I played a phenomenal game against Bassman UK, who was playing Black Templars. I was playing Harry Dan. Post-Actarius Harry Dan, and it was a super duper good game. It's up for subscribers right now. If you're a subscriber on Twitch, you can watch the VODs immediately, but that'll be up on youtube.com/tacticaltortoisetv, the replay channel, relatively soon. And that game was super good. So if you want to see Black Templars in action and like the cool shit they can do, Bassman UK was he was like a super good guy to play with, and he was a very good player. And you know, it was cool stuff, man. So highly recommend checking that game out. But I'm going to be playing again tomorrow. I'm playing against Grey Knights tomorrow at 5:30 Eastern time. So that's almost exactly 24 hours from right now over on the Twitch channel. So we're going to be doing that. The pod's 2 Black Templars, 2 Grey Knights players, and then a little old me. So I'm going to get a lot of games against Black Templars and Grey Knights on the stream. But we also have... I got a video about Adeptus Mechanicus coming out tomorrow too, which I'm pretty proud of. I've started to do deep dives in factions and talking about all of the core mechanics and all of the stratagems and everything you need to know when you're playing against the faction. And I'm pretty happy with how the first one came out. I did one for Tyranids way back in the day, and I was like, I'm going to do these for all the factions. And then 9th edition almost immediately got announced, and I was like, never mind. But we're back on the train, so I think it's going to be a good one. Can you use the Holy Orb with an Astartes grenade launcher? No. Unfortunately, you cannot. No, it's not an actual ranged attack. It is an effect that you trigger anytime you want during your shooting phase that deals mortal wounds on a 2+, and then also has another effect. It requires you to choose a unit within 6 inches in line of sight, but it's not an actual attack. So you can't load it into a grenade launcher, and you don't have to actually be shooting in order to use it. So there's a lot of super good uses of that ability. You can do it, like we talked about a couple times, you can do it after you advance. So, I talk about it on Bikers, right? You can advance 20 inches with a turbo boost and then use the Holy Orb on somebody. So that's super far. That's sick. You can also do it in between activating units to shoot. So you can have advanced up to somebody with the unit holding the Holy Orb. They shoot that unit, leave it on a couple damage. Somebody else shoots that unit, leaves it on 1 wound, and you're like, Holy Orb for the last damage, and you kill them. So like it's an out of sequence activation in your shooting phase, which is super powerful. Only D3 mortal wounds isn't the greatest thing ever, but if you ask any Eldar player, what they think about serpent shields, expending serpent shields to deal D3 mortal wounds out of sequence in the shooting phase, it's like super duper useful in the situations where you need it. So, yeah, that relic is pretty sweet. I like it. Plus, you get to make Monty Python jokes when you use it. It's like 1, 2, 5, 3, 3. Throws it. Good stuff. Classic. All right, everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here momentarily. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We had a bunch of people in the chat room. I appreciate everybody hanging out and chilling with me. But I'll be back doing a live stream here, I guess next Monday probably, and I'll be streaming most of the week over on twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. So if you want to watch me over there, do that. I got a video coming out tomorrow. We're gonna do some more videos this coming week. I'm back to like sort of more of a regular schedule, so expect more videos coming soon. And don't forget to enter to win some Black Templars. I could give you this. Maybe I'll give you that. All right, everybody. That's going to be it. See ya. Thanks, everyone.